Welcome to Let's Talk Security, where we spotlight cybersecurity companies and give an inside look at the people and technology behind the latest advancements in the industry. We discuss a wide range of topics with subject matter experts about today's cybersecurity challenges and how their solutions are helping organizations like yours maintain a continuous security posture. Please welcome the host of Let's Talk Security, Jeff Wolach.
Today on Let's Talk Security, I will be speaking with the company Netskope. I'm here with Nate Smolenski, Head of Security Strategies. Thanks for joining me today, Nate.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Same here. Nate, I have a list of questions that I put together for our chat today, so why don't we just jump right in?
Okay.
So
Absolutely.
for those that are not familiar, can you tell us a little bit about Netskope and your role as Head of Enterprise Security Strategy?
Yeah, sure. So Netskope, so we're a cloud security company. We've been around since 2012. And really, our goal is really to kind of accelerate digital transformation within security programs, right? Because as businesses go through transformation, right, you can't have a security program that is laggard and also not transforming to be able to enable what the business is trying to accomplish. So like one of our goals really is to take cloud security to the next level from the perspective of really being a data-centric, context-centric type of company, right? So what we've done, if you really think about in a simple terms, is taken all of these technologies that we've traditionally entombed in boxes in the data center, right? So we've have stacks of networking gear and stacks of security gear, and we've abstracted those capabilities out of those boxes and brought them together and married them in a software platform. And the intent of this is really to position, a lot of what those traditional technologies did in a much simpler and effective operationally sort of approach. And we also are moving, really moving those technologies to be closer to the edge to where your data is actually going. And one of the challenges that we see often today in businesses, organizations are getting stuck with the, I still backhaul all of my traffic to my data center or many data centers, right? I might have lots of sites around the world. I'm reliant on things like MPLS clouds to attach all of my branch locations back to a data center. And so that hairpinning or backhauling of traffic, really starts to erode away from some of the effectiveness of the technologies. And not to mention the fact that, we bought those technologies at a time and they were really targeted for, a different time and a different era, right? So as things have changed, there's a need to also kind of change how we think about security and really how we deliver that security as a service. And that's really what Netskope is aiming to do. We want to be, when we grow up, we want to be the next iconic security company, right? That we're investing heavily in innovation, and we're really bringing together sort of all of this, to really help change and sort of help reimagine what organizations do as they look to, challenge sort of that traditional status quo of, we need a data center and we need all of this stuff, right? So we're not minimizing the data center, but we're really looking at, the data center as a service provider, just like any other type of service provider that you may have, right? Your infrastructure as a service, your SaaS platforms that are out there. We're really leveling the playing field and allowing you to address the security concerns across that whole ecosystem. And I think that's really sort of where the market is moving, and we're definitely seeing that, from our perspective as well.
Interesting. From your background, I see you spent quite some time as a CISO for several organizations.
Yep.
I also noticed you got a little bit of a connection here in Florida. You went to UCF.
Yep, I did. Yeah, go Knights.
There you go. What made you go from the corporate world as a CISO to Netskope?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, I had a kind of a winding path a little bit, in security. I really kind of started out in technology space, in the financial services industry, and got into risk management. I was operational risk manager for a Swiss private bank here in New York, and I ended up, as a result of a reorganization and shuffling of deck chairs at the company, I ended up reporting to the CISO for that company, and really kind of sunk my teeth into security at that point. And then over the years, I held a bunch of CISO positions, as you mentioned, and really, one of the things that I was always challenged with was, I'm a very action-oriented person. I like to address change and like to make change actually happen, like as a change agent. And one of the challenges that I always faced was, a lot of times, as a person who likes to build a program and build an organization to make it better, you often become challenged with the rate at which you can change. And, so I was very much attracted to, from an innovation and technology perspective, startups and those types of smaller companies that have the ability to really pivot and change very quickly. And being able to be a part of that. So one of the things that was very attractive was I was a Netskope customer. I had, been involved with, kind of seeing them grow and, adopting those technologies in my own organization, and really looking to, understand how that, technology was really kind of evolving and going forward. And when I had the opportunity to come aboard with a great team, it just made sense. I was kind of at the point where I was sort of getting a little bit burned down on big corporate. And it's not to say that big corporate, is a challenge in and of itself, but it's more when you really want to kind of, get things done and drive change. Often, you have to have a lot more patience in the larger organizations, because, it takes a lot more time to make a left-hand turn in the ocean with the big tanker than it does with the smaller boat, right? So being in an agile organization was very attractive. And also for me, it was about what I could give back, right? Having been, sort of heads down and grinding through building programs, fixing things, kind of reorganizing programs for a long time. I was really looking for an opportunity to take a break from that, but also to really kind of broaden my network, broaden the brand, and really kind of get onto the bleeding edge of some of the things that I really believed in were happening in security as we kind of have seen it evolve. And I felt like Netskope offered that opportunity, and the team is just fantastic, and the vision is fantastic, and we've seen that really kind of accelerate and grow over the last few years. From humble small CASB cloud access security broker company to really taking on sort of the full transformational stack that we're doing today. So it's been great to be a part of that change and that evolution, and certainly being able to contribute back to the industry, through helping other CISOs and executives in other companies try and figure out how to unravel the problems that they have. And building those relationships has been very rewarding. So that, my role is really kind of bifurcated between, some of my time being spent internally at Netskope, with different kinds of programs and projects and go-to-market strategies and strategies around how products may work or things like that. But also then to really be that virtual CISO advisor for so many of our customers, and to support the sales organization as they get into those conversations that are very complicated. I will spend time often with, another CISO or a CTO or CIO or any of the direct reports in those organizations, and, really trying to get to know and understand, almost as if I was a new member of their team, right? Just trying to unpack all of those challenges and make some sense of it. And, it's a really interesting role, and it allows you to kind of, have a very diverse view of sort of what's happening in the industry. And I think that that's been beneficial to me, obviously for the role I'm in now, but I think, long term, that's a tremendous benefit I wouldn't have had, kind of having that sort of myopic lens that you can often get kind of sucked into when you have a really big program and a big challenge, and you're in a large, corporate organization that, is much slower to change.
Oh, and that's actually very cool, because, bringing your expertise from being a CISO into an organization that you can then become a trusted advisor, if you will, to some of these other CISOs that are having similar challenges, and being able to talk to them a little bit about the Netskope solutions and how it benefited you, as well as obviously can benefit them. That's really, really a good thing. And speaking of change, Nate, digital transformation is basically changing as we see it. It's changing the network traffic as we know it. It's creating some kind, like an aversion, if you will. The bulk of the internet traffic that was coming from the enterprise is no longer HTTP, HTTPS traffic that's destined for some informational website. Today, the majority of the internet traffic actually is destined for cloud services. So it's actually, not even going through the corporate network. IT organizations, as you know, are leveraging products like Office 365 and being able to bring a variety of productivity and collaboration needs to their business, again, without having to go through their network. But we're also seeing a lot of these type of cloud apps coming into the environment as what we call unsanctioned apps or shadow IT. 95% of the cloud services are unmanaged that we're finding, and 84% of that traffic is encrypted. So how do we get visibility, right? So that further complicates, as we know today, and the mobile, traffic as well, come off the corporate network. So how do we actually get that visibility back? How do we reestablish that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and those are all great sort of points because it's what we've been dealing with, and it's very interesting because when you think about sort of the last 7-8 months, and sort of what we've gone through from the pandemic perspective, I think what we've seen is an acceleration of this. This is not something really new. If you think about 10 years ago, we were using a lot of these services then, and many were really immature and were just, early adoption was happening. But the problem of what you mentioned, shadow IT and things like that, the challenges of that with the adoption of cloud became much more prevalent. When people they were bringing to work, capabilities on their mobile device or on the device that they were using that were there to make them more productive. And when you start thinking about where your data goes, that becomes a problem when you have no way to understand or to see or to have that visibility. That really kind of becomes a problem, and so it's been known, right? I think this has been on our doorstep for some time, but what I think we've seen now is as a result of need, from an operational capacity perspective, and really a return to operations through the pandemic, has been an interesting shift where it seems like the realization that we now have to do something about this problem is top of mind for so many people, right? So it's gone from, yeah, we know, we'll deal with it, we'll get there, we have bigger, higher priority items to deal with from a budgetary perspective, or maybe we just don't have the hands to do all these kinds of projects. I think that there's a shift in thinking that has occurred, and you mentioned inversion, and really that gets back to this concept of, in the old days, when we would build our castle with our moats and put our alligators in there, and we would, protect that data center, we had certain table stakes that we would look at, right? I mean, we want to keep good things in there, we want to keep the bad stuff out, and there were basic things that we were doing, and that changed over time, right? Technologies changed, we would bring new things in and shuffle older technologies out. But the one thing that was always, consistent from that architectural model, or what we call like a site-centric model, is that we really have tethered the users and all of the people that need to get to stuff to that site, that location, right? So you've got heavy VPN use, you've got heavy MPLS branch, network use, and all of these things that kind of always are coming back there. So that's where we built those network and security stacks. Well, the challenge with that is when you start thinking about how users work today, the workplace isn't a place, right? I mean, it's kind of wherever you are, and you might be working all the time. Most of us now, I would probably argue that we're always working now, because we're at home and we're working, and this is our office, and we're probably working in the car or wherever else we're going. So when you think about like how things happen now, it's not the same model as it used to be. And so this has been slowly kind of eroding over time. And so what has happened, at least what we've seen in the market and what we've really pushed behind, is when you think about that model, right? So it's almost like ancient Greek astronomers when they thought that, the sun rotated around them, right? And all the planets rotated around them. It's like we've totally flipped that model and realized that the heliocentric model is sort of the way that ultimately maybe we should be working, right? And that's really putting that user in the middle of the environment. Instead of having the data center everything tethered to the data center, we put the user in the middle, and we say we really want to make sure that whatever the user needs to get to, we have to allow them to get to it, right? So if that means going direct to a SaaS platform, or going direct to infrastructure as a service, or even back to their data center, or maybe a site that they have, it's all about what that user's doing, how they're interacting with those services, and the data that they're touching and interacting with. So it allows for a much more dynamic amount of use cases. And in the market today, we talk about secure access service edge, or SASE, as being sort of this, it's a Gartner term, but it's really sort of a thinking of that inversion, right? It's really flipping everything, the models that we've used traditionally, inside out. It's not saying we still don't need those, right? We still need to have the protection around the data center, the things that we have in there. It's just that now it can't be the thing that does all of the security, right? Because we have all these other things to secure everywhere else. So that's kind of what we've been seeing happening, and we were planning for this, for a long time. Really, that back of the napkin sketch that our founders had was really starting to kind of think about this problem as it was sort of manifesting itself earlier, years ago. And now I think we've actually gotten to the point where we've got, people like Gartner talking about it, right? Where they're saying this is where the market's going. Their research is showing that. We've got ESG saying the same thing. They're calling it something different, but at the end of the day, it's all the same concepts, right? Of really, putting that user in the middle of the universe and saying, we just need to have context about what that user's doing to be able to enable both the network services and the security services that are going to protect the data regardless of wherever it goes, right? It doesn't matter if it's going back to the data center or if it's going to, some other cloud service. We have to figure out a way to protect that in the way that it needs to, like what the expectations are from the business. And when you think about that architecturally, that's what really enables the business to move faster, right? Because the challenging old architecture, as business started to adopt cloud, they're trying to pull more and more out of the data center and say, we want to go over here, but you guys are still trying to control everything from here. And it really kind of, they were at odds, right? So it's not a model that was sustainable from a scalability standpoint, from a pure visibility standpoint in terms of how cloud works versus like traditional applications or just, basic internet, websites and so on. So there's a big shift that has happened, and I think we're going to see a pretty rapid acceleration in this model. And you're seeing it now with a lot of technology companies talking about this, this transformation that's occurring in our space. And it's a result of the business really driving it this way. We need to be that security team that can apply the right amount of braking when we go around the racetrack, and not too much braking, right? I mean, it's like we want to go as fast as possible but still stay on the track and be effective. And I think that's where we're starting to see the opportunity with these new architectural models and really using context as a driver to make better risk-based decisions, because that's what we're doing. I mean, it can't be so binary like it used to be. It has to address many, many more use cases because we're thinking about what a user does, right?
No, absolutely. And that's obviously, changing the way we address security, both from the corporate internal, traffic to obviously the people that are outside of the network, as you mentioned. I mean, the perimeter is gone. There's no more perimeter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I talked a little bit about earlier, traffic being encrypted, and I said 84%. I believe that's actually, low. I think there's a higher percentage of traffic being encrypted today. And as we both know, I mean, encryption is kind of a catch-22, right? It's great because we're protecting the information we need to be protecting, but at the same time, the bad people are actually leveraging that encrypted tunnel to do bad things. So if we're not consistently decrypting traffic at scale to gain insight, then we're really blind. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the limitations were traditionally were cost and time and infrastructure, right? If you were going to stand up a certain, stack of technology and you were going to do SSL decrypt and you wanted to decrypt everything, you knew that you needed to buy a lot more infrastructure to be able to do that. And that always came with it was the trade-off, right? What do we really need to decrypt to see versus what don't we need to decrypt, right? So then you were basically playing I want visibility, but I know I can only have 30% visibility. What is the 30% going to be made up of right now from a perspective of a threat perspective or anything else, right? What must we see versus we'll just have to deal with everything else kind of being encrypted. So I think as people started to realize that, the attacker also understands that thinking process and that mentality, and then they start moving to services where we as organizations in that traditional model, we have this sort of implicit trust. It's like, if you think about, okay, well, we're going to adopt, Office 365, and we're going to transform our Exchange environment and provide better collaboration for our company. Well, if you think about that, you start to trust the fact that, you have, this is our email platform. We're trusting the communications between that. This is our collaboration platform. We're trusting those communications. We're trusting how the users are using it. We understand that Microsoft has pretty good security, and all of those kinds of things come into play. But then when you think about, well, what happens if the bad guy moves into Office 365 too, and he starts saying, well, Now that I know all these people kind of implicitly trust these types of services, then I can masquerade in these services and act like I might be a trusted partner or a, or someone from their own organization, and really start, actually sending things, delivering payloads and sending different things into these organizations where they might be more apt to say, oh yeah, I will click on that because it came from who I think is someone, in my organization, or someone that I work with from another company that's using a similar service. And then you start seeing sort of this change in how what we'll call like badness is being delivered, to organizations. And that, it's very interesting. I mean, obviously, we've always kind of been multiple steps behind, but it's as we transform, so do the bad guys. It's not like they're going to continue just delivering the same old malware in the same old ways. They're trying to keep it as current as possible too. And they often have unlimited budgets where we do not, right? So we have to think of ways to be a little more intelligent about that. And obviously being able to decrypt SSL at scale is something that is a blessing and a curse, right? There's challenges with that as well. I mean, regulatory challenges and privacy challenges and all these kinds of things. But
Absolutely.
until you kind of can figure out and see everything, you can't make those informed decisions to decide not to see the things that you should be keeping private or what have you. So it's definitely something that the fact that we can do this at scale today is a powerful tool, right? Being able to do it and scale up in the cloud because of what the cloud brings to the table from an infrastructure standpoint, really can change the game in terms of, then now that we can see it, how do we apply, intelligent controls to that information and really make sense of what's going on, whether it's data leaving the organization or bad stuff coming in.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has obviously accelerated a lot of this transformation, if you will,
Yep.
and has us, it's left us guessing the future of what really IT security is going to be all about. How do
Yep.
you see the threat landscape changing when it comes to work from home?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that we saw, and we tracked this. This is something that we've been doing for a while. Our Threat Labs team started tracking user dispersion, some time ago, but it was mainly looked at as we would like to see what the spikes of remote work were during holiday periods. So you'd see these, like, Christmas would come along or Passover, and you'd see these spikes that would happen, during these holiday periods. But consistently, we were probably at about 26 to 30% remote work all the time, right, for our customers. And this is just captured from metadata. But as soon as the pandemic was, it was announced and everyone started going into lockdown, we saw this massive sort of hockey stick curve, which really showed that, now, and then it trended upwards. Now it's, in the 70+% of people working remotely now. And so when you kind of start to unpack that, there's a lot of interesting challenges there, right? Were you able as an organization to be prepared for this, to have mobile computing and remote work as something that was normal for your people, right? That's the first question. Because if you weren't, you may have had to return to operations with allowing users to access corporate assets and different types of infrastructure and applications with their personal devices, right? So now you're kind of you've opened things up to potentially personal devices. And then further, what about your remote access solutions, right? I mean, now you're talking about scaling VPN concentrators and hardware in a time where you can't even put people into a data center to do anything about that, right? So there are a lot of friction and challenges in that return to operations. So in many cases, I think what we saw was organizations were saying, well, it's temporary, it's for the pandemic, we're going to just allow everybody to go directly to Office 365 from wherever they are, even though we know that that's probably a bad thing, and we're going to have to come back and fix a lot of things, put new controls in. They were allowing those kinds of things to go direct to internet from these users. And then if you layer on top of that users, home Wi-Fi and home internet connections may not be entirely nearly as secure from a hardware perspective, from a configuration perspective, all of the different things, as your corporate environment, now you have potentially personal device going direct to the internet, so zero visibility, and you've got potentially either misconfigured or potentially easily compromised home networking. That adds a lot of, broadens the threat landscape quite a bit. And we did some interesting events early on in the pandemic where we talked a lot about this with other organizations. One in particular was a group of internal auditors that were really, looking at trying to understand this from an audit perspective. Like, how do we get our arms around this? And, some of the things that we talked about with them and through research, we're showing that, during those first couple of months of the pandemic, the FBI saw this massive increase of business email compromise attacks on executives in organizations where, someone masquerades as the CFO and they call the CEO and they're like, we're doing this business deal. I need you to approve this wire transfer that's going to buy some company somewhere. All these things happen all the time anyway. But now you've got people captive in their homes, right? So you've got CEOs and executives that are there and now they're reachable. So it's very simple for the bad guy to send a text or really to, social engineer their way into a conversation that can lead to this kind of attack. And so when you start thinking about all those things happening together and the volume of people at home, the threat landscape is just massive now, right? And so really it becomes, an interesting time to start thinking about implementing, architectural principles that can help to kind of narrow that gap, right? And having that visibility reestablished for where your users are actually interacting if they're going direct to the internet for services because they have to. And also being able to kind of monitor sort of all of those things, data exfiltration and threats that might be delivered from the cloud most oftenly now. So when you're thinking about all those things, it really becomes a challenge. And I think it's going to be something that is going to accelerate technology, to address some of these challenges. You're going to see a lot of folks. Obviously, we're talking about the concept of zero trust just as much as we have with digital transformation. It's like the marketing buzzword. And I think you're starting to see people start to realize that it's not a product, right? That it's something that you have to have an ecosystem approach to really narrowing your focus of how you allow people to access things. And it has to be continuous, right? There's like this risk assessment process that, really requires you to understand what users are doing and how they're interacting with data and information and bringing all that information together to make decisions. And that I think is something we're going to see a massive acceleration towards, because the realization after all of this is going to be we can't go back to what we were doing. We pulled ourselves out of that very inorganically in a forced manner and forced the change. And we know we have to go back and fix stuff now because we're kind of, we're flying a little naked right now. I think in many cases, not everyone, but there's certainly organizations out there that had to, right? They without it, they wouldn't be in operation today. So I think this change is really going to change how we look at the threat landscape, and how big it is, because I think with organizations not necessarily returning to work and some maybe not returning to work in an office environment ever, you're going to see the need for this to be common. It's not going to work the old way, right? You're just not going to be able to scale it with, large organizations saying stay home for another 8 months, or maybe 60% of you stay home in perpetuity, right? So I think the changing landscape is really forcing how we look at security and handle some of those things.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that say, oh, new normal. Nah, we're going to go back the way it was, but I don't see it. So you see more of a hybrid model taking place, with basically trying to go back into, the workforce somehow?
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations. I had the benefit this year of having a lot of great conversations, as part of a lot of different campaigns that we were running. We're just to sit down with executives and have these exact kind of talks. Like, what are you guys seeing? What are you doing? And I think early on, what I would say from those conversations, and these were, lots of CISOs and other execs were saying, yeah, I think we're going to go back, but it's going to be different, right? I think that was the realization was we knew would be different. And as time went on, you started to see approaches where people were heading back to the office in these hybrid models, similar to what schools are doing, where maybe you're in the office a couple of days a week, you're with the same group of people. So if someone gets sick, that cohort kind of, mechanism can help to identify, hey, we don't have to shut the whole place down. We just quarantine this one group, and those are the people, but we can still maintain operations. That definitely became something that was much more commonplace. But I think in the time since then, people started seeing in many cases that, knowledge workers were very productive at home. And I think it was a big eye opener for some of the more traditional organizations that were not, big fans of remote work, right? They had concerns about it. They had concerns about performance. They had concerns about just sort of the collaboration and everything that happens in the workspace when we can actually physically be together. And I think what we saw is a lot of organizations, really ones that maybe we wouldn't expect, become very, very progressive right away because their employees perform so well. The morale was good. They were home, they were teaching their kids and doing work and were being productive and were getting lots of stuff done because they could work whenever made the most sense for them and adjust their schedules accordingly. And that allowed for a lot of productivity. You got productivity from not having to commute. You lowered costs, you reduced expense budgets, which you got to think for most organizations is pretty amazing thing to do during a time when economically maybe not everybody was doing so well. So I think we're going to be in a hybrid environment. I mean, obviously some organizations, manufacturing, you got to have people in those facilities, right? But and hospitals and all sorts of things like that, there's always going to be those places where people have to be there. But I think in many cases, you're going to see organizations that are just going to be remote work will be the norm. And you'll probably have, scheduled times to come into the office for certain types of things. But it's certainly not going to be like it used to be, I don't believe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've actually been working from home for 30 years. So when this hit, I'm like, okay, so
everybody's like me now. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk briefly about the impact of stay operating, right?
Yep.
This has been kind of a buzz phrase, if you will, during the pandemic. Enterprises, they've been kind of forced into the transformation in many of the ways that, they have to continue to operate no matter where their employees are. Video and collaboration companies like Zoom, as we know, signed up over 200 million new users. Entire school systems and also medical practices, doing telehealth visits, kind of interesting. It's changed, obviously, the way that we have been so used to doing things, right?
Yeah.
So VPN usage, as you know, it's exploded, not only in number of users, but capacity. We talked about that a little while ago.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing that direct to internet moving rapidly. So with this in mind, what do you think the gotta have security tools or processes are that we're going to need as an organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, the answer is going to vary depending on the type of organization and, the type of people and the types of processes and how their business works. But I think, gone are the days of relying solely on that data center to provide the security protection for everything else, right? It's going to need to protect itself, right? The contents that are in it. And you're probably going to have remote access technology that's going to get you into that environment in some way, shape, or form or another. But I see that people are going to be moving away from the traditional VPN in the traditional sense, because there are better ways to do it. If you think about VPN, just in a sense, if I'm getting access to an environment, in a lot of real simple cases, you're giving me access to the network as if I was sitting in the building, right? So when I'm sitting in the building, I've gone through security. You kind of know who I am. There's sort of a know your employee sort of process. But when you think about dropping me onto a network and think about all those complexities we just talked about, with maybe I'm not on a trusted device that, maybe my security on my home Wi-Fi network's not very good, and you start thinking about all those things, you really open the door very wide to a variety of threats and to a variety of problems. So I think one thing that we're going to see, and we've seen it, is an acceleration of people adopting like zero trust access technologies, right? So Netskope has a product that fits into this, same mold called private access. And really its intent is to really bring about change from the perspective of, do I need to give you the entire network subnet that you need, that you would normally have when you're in the office? Or do I really just need to expose to you that particular application and that's it? If you're an admin for some specific thing, or maybe you do data entry into a specific thing. And if I can do that, I can have a much tighter grip around what you have access to do. I don't have to worry about all these other things. I don't have to worry as much about east-west movement and all of these other things that can happen when, we just say, here's the network, you're on. Same thing with like a server admin or someone who has to physically monitor or deal with hardware or infrastructure in a data center environment. You think about it from the perspective of, if I have a Linux admin that has hundreds of servers that they may have to touch at any given time, that may require me in a traditional VPN perspective to give them access to lots of things in the data center, right? They may have, if they're doing some type of enclaving, we may have lots of different subnets that we need to allow them to have access to. And that really opens up sort of that threat landscape from if they get compromised, then now we've, kind of given this, this tunnel into our environment that we really, we're going to have a potential problem with. So if I can go and say that now I'm going to allow you to be provisioned the machines that you need to touch, and all that you need is SSH to administer those machines, if that's what you need, then we're just going to give you that one specific protocol, and we're going to give you exactly the machines that you need to administer, and that's it. And that's all you get, and maybe some other applications. But the idea there is to really kind of shrink that, the footprint of what you're exposing to the user remotely, and that allows you to have a lot more control. Now, add on top of that, you need to be able to see what they're doing. You need to be able to have strong authentication and identity controls. And when you think about the other things that we talk about, we often talk about vectors of risk, right? So when you think about it, you've got the data risk vector, right? The user risk vector, you've got the application risk vector. All of these things have to kind of come together for most of anyone to make any sort of logical decision around whether or not someone can do something, right? So if I have a user that's on an untrusted device and they need to access an application, maybe I need to be able to just restrict them to be able to view that application because I don't trust the device they're on. Or maybe the device has disabled all of the, maybe the user's disabled all the security features on the device, and I don't want that type of a device accessing that information. So now I can be much more granular with my controls as opposed to being binary like we used to do. It's just, oh, you're just not allowed to do anything. We're going to block you completely. Now I can be much more surgical with applying controls. And I'd say, well, in this instance, you're not accessing sensitive data, but you're still coming from an untrusted device. So I'm only going to allow you read only to that, or I'm only going to allow certain kinds of data to be accessed, right? So really being much more specific. That's where we're all going. I mean, and that's ultimately where we're aiming to, help businesses transform. Because when you think about it, if we can do those kinds of things, we make it a lot more expensive for the bad guy, right? Because he's got to take different tactics and he's got to do a better job. And so if we increase the cost for them, the hope and the desire is to, reap the benefits of having them go look for an easier target. That would be the goal. But it really all starts with getting that visibility, because once you have that visibility, then and you've got visibility to all of the places that your data is going and your users are interacting with, then you can really start applying smart controls. And it's that age-old problem of, if everything was like, all of the tools that we had were applying controls in a very specific manner, and oftentimes we would get a lot of friction from end users, right? They don't want that. So what happens? Then users try to find alternative ways to go around those controls. So those controls become ineffective. They're expensive, right? Because you have to buy technology to do them. And really, that's not the point. That's not the intent. Because what do you ultimately end up with? You might end up with in one case, a $5 risk with $100,000 worth of controls around it. And then over here, where you don't have any controls, you have all these risks and maybe nothing, right? So really trying to level that playing field to match up the control and the risk environment together, and managing it in a way that allows users to operate like we all operate as consumers. That's really what's happening here. We want to be able to operate like we do in our personal lives at work, because now the two are, they're very blended, right? It's kind of how we're all living now. So being able to have the security tools and capabilities to provide the visibility to give you those vectors of risk, whether it be application risk, the user risk, what are their behaviors, how are they been operating, bringing all that data together to enable you to make a decision as to whether or not someone can do something. It's extremely powerful. And really, it's really liberating, because it's going to allow people to work however they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. And ultimately, I think that's going to make everybody a lot more effective and happy too.
I agree. You talked about zero trust, which, like you say, it's not a product. It's actually a mindset, pretty much. It's a paradigm shift in the way we used to pretty much just let everything go through and then we'll blacklist it. Zero trust is completely opposite. We don't trust anybody. And then we're going to only, allow what we want to allow and be very granular. And like you say, put the controls, in place so that, users are not actually exposing too much risk of the corporate world, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, we all know about the old firewall, right? What does this all mean when it comes to controls as we built behind the firewall, and how is Netskope kind of approaching that when we go beyond the firewall?
Sure. So when we think about like traditional firewall, I mean, I said it in the beginning, like we look at the data center, I mean, there's still a need to protect that, right? What I think has changed is if you think about the cycles of capital expenditure that we may have traditionally had in security or just in IT in general, we're refreshing hardware all the time, and typically with that was increasing the capacity of that hardware so it could scale more, maybe adding more hardware so you can do more of that visibility, right? Getting that SSL decrypt. A lot of things kind of come into play there. So when you think about it, if your data center really is going to be, sort of minimized, and over time you might move more out of it, but you still have things that you're going to protect there, you're still going to need those technologies. It doesn't mean they go away. It means that maybe you're not going to buy as many or as big because you have other things to address. And I think what ultimately the way we look at it is we've taken those capabilities, right? So the control capabilities, we've abstracted them and we put them in the software. So when it comes to like your egress technologies for a proxy and things like that, we're doing that in software now. And what we've done is we've simplified the challenges of the lack of communications between all those tools. If you think about all those boxes in the old days, they didn't talk to each other. It was kind of like a trailer park of stuff that maybe had some shared plumbing between, a couple different things, and we made the best of it, right? We had to layer all kinds of tools on top of those tools to gain value and insight and bring the data together, right? Think about all the disparate data from each of those technologies that you had to bring together to make a story, to understand something. So by abstracting what those tools do and putting it into software, it allows us to innovate very quickly, but it also allows us to have normalized data and be able to be very granular about how we address the problems that those tools used to address, right? So being able to say, I can actually see what a cloud service is communicating between two services or between a user and a service and understand it. Those traditional tools in many cases were kind of blind to the language. It's almost like, traveling to a foreign country and you're trying to speak English, and you're in Japan and they don't understand you, you don't understand them. And so you do your best, right? You try to meet somewhere in the middle to solve a problem or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so, today we need to be able to, our technologies have to be able to understand the language of the internet, and it's changed over the years, right? It used to be very simple, but when you look at it now, you could ask yourself the question, is LinkedIn a cloud service, or is that just the internet? Is, CNN a cloud service, or is that just the internet? And if you look at how all of these different, types of sites and services are built, they're all built in a different way now than they used to be, right? They use APIs, they communicate differently. And so when users interact with them, you need technology that's able to kind of decode all of that and understand the language that those services are speaking. Because if you think about it, in the old way, if we were in a data center site or location and a user was going to, egress the internet and go to a cloud service, that first time that user went to that cloud service and moved data, you would see the data move, right? You'd see some bytes up or bytes down between the user and that service, but you wouldn't understand what that was, right? Not unless you were doing all kinds of additional inspection. You might have some context about the data and the user, but you were pretty limited on what exactly that user was doing. You might get a get or a put or something like that in your proxy log. But in the world we live in today, there could be 20, 30, dozens of different activities that a user might be able to do in the cloud. Think about Office 365, all the different applications and all the things that you can do there, right? So if that's the thing that you're monitoring, just seeing data moving up and some simple, traditional internet transaction that the proxy might pick up isn't really going to tell you anything. You're not going to have that visibility to the level of detail that you need to actually do something about it. You could block it, but that's why we've been in this sort of, wrestling match about, block allow forever, right? It really kind of puts us in a situation where we have to go back to those draconian sort of approaches. And so the idea here is to be able to, if I understand what the services allow and don't allow, I can be very granular and say, well, I'm going to allow you from this device and this type of app, from an app risk perspective, working with this kind of data, I'm going to allow you to upload it to this service, but I'm not going to allow you to download it from there. I'm going to allow you to share it from this service, but only with these few people that I've approved for you to share it with. In a traditional sense, if that data moves to that cloud service and you're inspecting that with an egress technology, once it's left the barn, now it's kind of like, well, how do I now, once it's in the service, how do I get any sort of visibility on where it's going? Because it's left my perimeter. And now you have all these other sort of little ancillary perimeters that are on the outside as service providers, and you need to understand how those communications work. So now once that data has been outside your boundary, now you need to be able to see service to service communication. Just think about synchronization clients on your laptop or your mobile device. You could be saving data there all the time and have no idea that, not even thinking about it. It's all going up to Office 365 or Google Drive or wherever. But you're not doing that. It's synchronizing that data to help you to be more efficient. But does all that data belong up there? I mean, that's the question. And so that's where we're ultimately going to solve those problems. And that's ultimately what we help customers do.
No, that's awesome. That is really cool. And Nate, we're coming up on our time today, but I appreciate you, talking to me about the need for this type of technology and the shifting that we're seeing with the whole, digital transformation.
Yep.
If anybody wants to learn any more information or anything else about Netskope, please feel free to contact us at Sinnott Wolach Technology Group. And again, Nate, I appreciate your time with me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Thanks
been
great. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Check out our YouTube channel for previous Let's Talk Security broadcasts. Just go to youtube.com and search for Sinnott Wolach Technology Group. This episode is sponsored by Netskope, data-centric, cloud-smart, fast. And produced by Events by Drew Productions. Let's Talk Security is brought to you by Sinnott Wolach Technology Group, a leading provider of next-generation network and information security solutions and services.